General P. Ravi Shankar is a retired Director General. He is an alumnus of the National Defence Academy at Khadavasala and the Defence Service Staff College in Wellington, the Army War College in Mao, the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, and the National Defence College in New Delhi. He has held many important commands, staff, and instructional appointments in the Army and has a vast operational experience that has been served in all kinds of terrains and operational situations that the Indian Army has faced in the past 4 decades. He has a deep knowledge, understanding, and experience in successful defense planning and acquisition that has been spanning over a decade. Currently, he is a professor in the Aerospace Department of the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and is actively involved in applied research. So we're very happy to have you here with us today, and we'd like to start with our questions. So how do you feel the appointment of the CDS affects the functioning of our armed forces?
Yeah. First and foremost, what you have to understand is that the Chief of Defence Staff, the need for a Chief of Defence Staff was felt during the Kargil War. There was a committee called the Kargil Review Committee which was set up, and they said, look, a lot of things could have been done better by India in that war had we had a Chief of Defence Staff. So that is one part. Second part of the story is that most modern armies like USA, China, Russia, UK, they've all gone to the Chief of Defence Staff system. So it was felt that we should also have a Chief of Defence Staff. Now, what does the Chief of Defence Staff do? He'll optimize and coordinate, various aspects between the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, Coast Guard, and anyone else who forms part of the defense establishment. You need jointness in operations. You need jointness in, so that the whole approach is joint. It's not a singular approach. You need jointness in logistics. You can do communications together, right? And a lot of services, a lot of infrastructure. You can develop joint infrastructure. So all this, was being done in a piecemeal manner earlier. So the Chief of Defence Staff gets that synergy between the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, so that their capabilities are best utilized for the nations together, one, for better effect and at least cost. And you get optimal utilization for whatever you invested in. And the second thing is, this is part of coordination, prioritization, and all that. Then there are a lot of defense procurement which goes on. Now, a lot of things we use defense which are common. For example, if you're looking at surveillance resources, the basic devices are common. The platforms might change. You might put a camera on top of an aircraft or a ship or on land, but the camera remains the same. So you then coordinate, for example, UAVs. UAVs, everyone uses UAVs, right? So you could buy common UAVs with common spares, common everything, right? So that helps quite a bit, and so that procurement thing, this thing. Then, of course, in India, we are moving towards something called the joint commands or the theatre commands, which is going to happen in times to come. So the CDS will have a big role in evolving the joint commands in the theatre command system. And of course, we'll be able to synergize our operations better. Like right now, it's happening in Ladakh. You find that the Air Force and the Army are synergizing better because of the Chief of Defence Staff. And also, the Navy is also synergized, though it is not visible in Ladakh, but it has already gone out and been deployed in the Indian Ocean. So CDS is a very critical element who has now come in. It is new, the system is new, it will take time. And we have to patiently see how it evolves. Okay, so that's how the CDS is, and I'm sure things will work out well in the future.
I think Kartavya has a question.
Yeah.
Kartavya, your mic is muted.
I can't hear you. No, you can't be heard at all. No, I think you might as well ask the question.
Right. So I'll move on to the next question for now. So how far do you think India has progressed on developing military technology, and what are further steps the DRDO can take to work efficiently?
Right, that's a good question. First and foremost, the DRDO, we have a very good setup in the DRDO. It's quite a widespread setup covering all disciplines. And now DRDO has made some very good progress. For example, in the field of missiles, I think our technologies are up to world standards and 10 times better. Space-based systems, we are there. Space technologies, we are there. Right. Things like related to atomic energy and related development in the DRDO, we are already there. Right. So we are in fact close technologically in these three spheres: space, missiles, and in atomic energy. We are up with the best. In fact, our space is still ahead of us. Okay, so on that score, we have no issue. Now, our problem has been, in the lower technologies. I mean, very funny. We always say, when we talk of something, this is not rocket science. Okay? Right? But very funnily, we have mastered rocket science and not mastered the others. Okay. Right. So, in armament and ammunition, we have lagged a bit. The traditional systems. Okay. But again, rockets and missiles, we are far ahead. There are reasons for it. One of the reasons, which I feel major reasons, is the way DRDO has evolved. It has evolved into a silo of its own, and the interconnectivity between the armed forces and the DRDO has reduced. Okay. So you have a Army, Navy, and Air Force in three silos, and you have the DRDO in one silo, and the interconnectivity is poor. So as a result, the DRDO is not able to give what the Army wants or the services want, and the services are not able to get the best of the DRDO. Right? So whenever in action, you find results. Now I'll give you a personal example. When I was in the last 2 years of service, we've been developing this Pinaka rocket system for a long time, and we finally developed it. And when we developed it, it had a range of about 38 kilometers. So the DRDO came up with the extended range version. When they came up with the extended range version, this extended range was 5 kilometers range, but it was not accurate because it was not a guided system. So at that point of time, I felt that look, if the accuracy is not there, what's the use of firing it at 55 kilometers if it doesn't go on to hit the target? Okay. So I went back to the then, director of RCI. RCI is Representative Imarat, which is set up by Dr. Abdul Kalam. Dr. Satish Reddy, who's now the Secretary DRDO. And I told him, look, this is the issue. He said, why not? We'll go back and we'll put a guidance system on it. So then he said, sir, we'll do that, but you have to take the lead and you have to be involved in it. So I said, fine. So he put together a team and he said, here's the team, do. So we sat down, and every month, 2 months, I kept taking reviews, and I was very fully into it. In a matter of 1 year, we developed a guided long-range Pinaka.
Okay.
with the range of now from 55 it had jumped to 75 kilometers. And within a matter of 1.5 years we fired it. And today that is being inducted into service with a range of 85 kilometers. Because of the closeness we developed with the whole system. And it has just taken us about years, which is very a major system like this. So there is greater interaction, it can be done. So that is where we have to see. And we have to ensure that the Army, Navy and the Air Force lead the projects, because ultimately the idea is working for them. It's not an end to itself. This research is not an end to itself unless you produce a weapon system.
Right.
And the people who need the weapon systems are the armed forces, and they have to lead it. So that is something which is lacking. There are people aware of this, and I'm sure things will improve in the future. Right? Yeah.
All right. So just to follow up, does India acquiring and creating better anti-ballistic missile systems disturb its deterrence with Pakistan?
See, first and foremost, you have to understand that an anti-ballistic system is a defensive system which takes down incoming missiles.
Right.
Okay. In a sense, it disturbs the deterrence because it lowers the deterrence value of Pakistan's missiles. It increases our deterrence. Okay. Right. Because your anti-ballistic missile will take down on the incoming missile. So that is the thing. First. Second part of the story is, it is not only a deterrence to Pakistan, but it is a deterrence to China also. Because one anti-ballistic missile system if you have, it doesn't matter whether it's coming from China or Pakistan, both you will hit. But there's a couple of issues to this. What? First, having a missile is not important, but to have a system is important. Now, a system approach means that you need to have a surveillance system to detect incoming missiles, which could be linked with space. You need a command and control system. You need a communication system. And then you need the missile system to react. Okay, you need the whole lot. One. Number two, you need to know what the other fellow is firing at you. When you're talking of right? For example, if he's firing a nuclear weapon at you, okay, there is no point in destroying that nuclear weapon in air, because the worst kind of a nuclear blast is a low air burst. It affects more people. So you have to catch this nuclear weapon much farther up, out in the outer space, if it is that kind of a missile. But if it's a lower missile, it is better it comes and hits the ground, or you catch it over their territory. Okay, so there are methods. That's why the surveillance is important. The knowledge of what Pakistan or China have is important. You need to know where they're deployed. You need to know when they're going to use and all that. So it's not easy to use a nuclear weapon, because you have to go through escalatory processes. Even now, you see, India and China are almost at war, but there is no talk of nuclear weapons. Okay, there's no talk either by India or by China. So we have not come to that escalation process where you can start thinking of using nuclear weapons. Okay, so it's a complex thing, but overall, if you have an anti-ballistic missile system, your deterrence value goes up. Yeah, to that extent you disturb the deterrence value of the opponent, not your own.
Okay. Kazahar?
Yeah. So the geography of India poses a lot of importance in the management of the combat service force as well, and multitude of various other factors that affect the movement of the army. when they go to the border. So, for example, we saw in the Kargil conflict in 1999 the reliability and the serviceability of the Indian Army logistical vehicles, especially. So, how far has like the military jumped in years, and is the military logistics of India developing to better facilitate the movement of the artillery and troops to the border areas?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and a contemporary question. And you need to understand it from what is happening today on the Ladakh front. Okay. First and foremost, we'll come back to the Ladakh front because I'll explain that to you. First and foremost, you have to understand India has a varied geography. The geography in Ladakh is different from the geography in Sikkim, and it is different from the geography in Far East, Arunachal Pradesh, and it is different from the central sector, which is that Uttaranchal and that next to Nepal. So we have to cater for various geographies. It is not one geography in mountains also. Okay, but by and large, our road infrastructure has come a long way. Well, first talk of the roads, then we'll get to the other things. Has come a long way over the past 15-20 years. Okay, today we have roads going right up to the border almost everywhere. Yeah. You'll see today in papers that the Chinese have better infrastructure on their side. Yes. Okay. There is no doubt about it. And we don't have that good infrastructure. But that is for a different reason. The reason is, on our side of the border, the Himalayas goes from 0 to 20,000 feet in a matter of just about 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers. For example, when you say Siliguri in the east or Bangladesh, it is at mean sea level. And within 200 kilometers, you are on the Tibetan plateau, which is 200 feet high. Okay, it's steep. And the Himalayas are young, they are very unstable. So there are problems for us. Whereas on the Tibetan side, it's a plateau. It's gradual. So that is why on the Chinese side, it is easier to build roads and maintain them. And they are quite flat there. Whereas for us, on our side, we are affected by young mountains, we are affected by monsoons, we are affected by mudslides, roads cave in and all that. It's a tougher ask for us. And steepness of roads. So, considering that, we have done well. Our roads are quite up there. Right? And that is why, if you see, as China kept building up in Ladakh, we kept mirroring the deployment. We didn't lag. Mobilization, everything, we didn't lag. So, there's no problem on that score. It could be better, yes. That infrastructure is not only good for the armed forces, but also for people living there. Communication, mobiles, livelihood, everything. Right. The second part of the story is, we've been living with this problem now for 30 years. See, we maintain our armed forces in some of the toughest areas. The Siachen Glacier is the single most toughest area in the world where we maintain people. This subsector north, which is eastern Ladakh, is is worse than the Siachen Glacier. People don't understand it. We've been maintaining people there for the past 30 years. Right. Now the road to Ladakh. Okay, there are two roads to Ladakh. One goes through Jammu and Kashmir. It goes through the pass called the Zojila Pass, and the other goes through the Kulu Manali. It's called the Rohtang Pass. These days, there's a big tunnel coming up there called the Rohtang Tunnel. Now, both these roads close for 6 months in a year. They are only open for 6 months in a year. That means our entire Ladakh, complete Leh Ladakh, Kargil, all that is closed for 6 months. They're only air maintained. Okay. So we have experience of this for the past 30 years. We've been doing it. So we have fantastic procedures by which we know how to handle this. We have systems called the advanced winter stocking, where the moment the roads open, we stock for 1 year. Everything goes up from here and gets stocked. Again, like I said, Chandigarh is almost at 1,000 feet, and whereas Leh, Ladakh and Eastern Ladakh at 16,000 feet. You have to take everything up, right? So we have greater difficulties. But then we have, like I said, everything. Now with this, the next thing which has happened is with the overall development which is taking place, a lot of other facilities have come up. Communications have improved. I remember when I was there as a youngster, I couldn't speak to my wife or children from there at all. To speak to them meant I had to drive 50, 60 kilometers, wait for 1-2 hours and speak for 3 minutes and pay 200 rupees. Those days, I'm talking about 20 years back, 200 was a lot of big money. Today, you can speak from any part of India to home in maybe 10 bucks or even less. It doesn't cost, right? So a lot of things have changed. A lot of issues have changed. So it's not a thing. And now that our Prime Minister, the other day when he went to Ladakh, he said he'll triple the rate of development and progress, okay, which has already been achieved. It's going to be great. And you must know, I mean, this is something which we should all be proud of. When we reach Ladakh and the northern areas of Ladakh and, Eastern Ladakh where this Sino-Indian standoff is happening, or for that matter, the Siachen Glacier is happening, we cross 3 of the highest motorable passes in the world. 1, 2, 3. Kardungla Pass is 18,600 odd feet. The Changla Pass, which goes to Eastern Ladakh and this thing, that is at 18,400 feet. There's another pass which called Thangla Pass, which is south of Leh, which leads into Leh. That is at 18,100 feet. There are no other passes bigger than this. And India keeps them open 24/7, 365 days a year. Okay, so we have some great strengths and we have some great achievements, which I don't know. I don't think you knew about this. Did you? And not only that, our infrastructure is so good that today Kardungla is a tourist spot. People go there and buy, T-shirts called "I've been to Kardungla."
Yes.
Yeah. And people go to Nathula, which is at 14,500 feet within China border. It's a big tourist spot. So a lot of things have changed, right? I think we have come a long way, right? Yeah. Tell me, what next?
So, sir, as you talked about the Ladakh issue in the beginning, so we have seen that one of the first things China opposed was when India started building a road network in Ladakh. So how can we better our capabilities on the borders while maintaining some of the foreign relations with our neighbors?
See, the thing with China and India, I'll turn the question a little differently. Why is China objecting to this? You have to understand that. First and foremost, China developed better infrastructure on their side of Tibet, right? Long back. And they integrated Tibet to the extent feasible. Okay. Whereas we couldn't for many reasons. Now, the moment you start developing your side of the border, you are getting parity with China. China can no more do what it was doing. Earlier, if there was no road to a particular area, okay, China had a road that side. They used to come, cross, or build roads into our area and say, oh, this was my road. Because these borders never got demarcated for whatever reason. The whole thing. Now that you're building your roads, he's got problems. We are now there to tell him, look, you please go back. This is not your area. Okay. So this is one part. And the second part is India wants to keep China down because they know that India is their main competitor in China. India has as much rising power as much as China is. While China is competing with USA, India is competing with China. Okay, so tomorrow they have a problem that we might overtake them. So they want to keep on. Okay, and sometime much later when you people talk, you will say, oh, how we overtook China. Maybe 30, 40 years back when you are in my position and some youngster is talking to you, you will say, okay, China is gone. It is a finished power. We are better. So they are scared of that. So these issues are there. But what happens is, this is my reading. Initially, there will be friction when development takes place. As people start realizing that development is inevitable and it is there to stay, you start reconciling to the fact that this development is taking place at both places. Then you start having better relations. Look at Europe, France, Germany. They fought through 2 world wars. They killed so many people, each other. They killed civilians. There was so much bombing, so much death. They had, the Nazis came up. They had concentration camps. So many people were killed. Jews, this, that, all that. But as they developed, they forgot war. And now, union. They are doing everything together. They are sharing everything together. They even have currency. Okay, yes. They have a common system, right? And the 2 most bitterest is France and Germany of the Second World War and the First World War. Today are the best of friends, right? So things will, as things improve, foreign relations will improve. It is just we are about with the equation between China, in my opinion, is about half a century behind. Maybe even more, maybe 75 years behind. Maybe 75 years ahead, we'll be friends.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So, sir, moving towards research now. So, like I had mentioned, you are a professor in the aerospace department at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and you're also actively involved in applied research. So, according to you, sir, what is the most important field of research that India needs to focus on in the coming years to improve its defense capabilities?
Yeah, that's a very important question. There is not one single technology or one single area where we have to focus on. We have to focus on a whole lot of technologies. The world is moving towards something called the multi-domain operations. What is the multi-domain operations? Traditionally, we have, fought on land, air, and sea. The new domains in which operations are being carried out are cyberspace, space, electronic media, and things like that. Okay, and these are all new technologies, right? Now, these new technologies like AI or additive manufacturing, all these are coming in a big way to support the new domains. Okay. Now, these new domains, you have to understand, are being developed by young people like you. All of you. You understand it better. I don't. I have a clue about artificial intelligence. You ask me, and what is artificial intelligence? I'll say, well, it's artificial, nothing more. Okay, but people like you have greater meaning, right? So, this entire new technologies or disruptive technologies, as we call it, they're dual use and can be used for defense research. They are resident in academic institutions. And it is required by defense establishment. So there has to be a bridge which has to come up. Okay. And the DRDO also focuses on older technologies. It has now started focusing on the newer technologies, but there's a long way to go. So you have to focus on this and build bridges with the academic institutions. So the second part of it is most of our academic institutions and our students go abroad and do great things for Microsoft and Amazon and all NASA and all that. Why can't they do for ourselves? So we are not tapping our own talent, right? So we need to do that. So that is one of the reasons why we need to build bridges. Now, okay, what are the technologies which I think are very important? We need, if you ask me which are the main technologies, I would say aerospace, I would say cyberspace, and I would say communication technologies and disruptive technologies. These four. Disruptive is a whole big bunch, but aerospace, unmanned technologies, cyberspace, communication, 5G, right? But none of these technologies are standalone technologies. They are integrated technologies. If you say aerospace technology, it is not one. It could be sensors, it could be, basic navigation, it could be weaponization. So a whole lot of integrated technologies come into play. So that is a multidisciplinary approach which you have to adopt. Okay, so that is where we have to actually progress. But I'll give you a different sense. About 4-5 months back, before this coronavirus hit us, I had gone to Delhi and I attended a conference of the Army Technology Board. And all these technologies were being discussed. So they said, look, how do you develop these technologies and get them into the defense forces? And mind you, that audience was about 2,000 people sitting there, mostly armed forces officers. And their view was the only way to bring these technologies into the armed forces is through the startups. Okay, and startups, where are they? They are in academic institutions. Who makes the startups? Young people like you. Okay, I can't do a startup. I should do a finish up, right? There's a difference. So that is where you need to bridge this gap and build bridges with the academic institution. Because we have a whole lot of brain power, which I think we need to optimize. Right? Does it answer your questions? Yeah.
So, sir, you believe in the importance of modernization of artillery through indigenization. But as we see, India still acquires weapon systems that are foreign made, and there's a lot to do to make it indigenous. So, in your opinion, what are some of the steps the country should be taking in this direction to achieve our aim?
Yeah, that's also a fair question and a good question. See, in India, we've indigenized two systems. One is shipbuilding. The naval ships generally today are our own. We are building our own aircraft carrier, we are building our own nuclear submarine, we are building all ships of our own, right? And now we have complete artillery technology to right from the gun, the ammunition, the missiles and everything. Okay, these two are our success stories. Whereas we have not been able to make success in other fields. Okay, now we need to see what made these successful, learn lessons from it and replicate it elsewhere. Okay, that is examination of these models will go a long way. In fact, I've had a word with a lot of people and I said, why don't you do it? And they say, yeah, why don't we do it? I mean, we should do it. And now with this thing of Atmanirbhar Bharat and self-sufficiency drive which the Prime Minister has kicked off, and the fact that our economy cannot afford costly systems anymore, we cannot afford imported systems, we are now going to be forced to go in for indigenization. Earlier, it was easy not to get involved with indigenization. You buy anything from outside and you have a ready-made weapon system. You don't have to go through the loop of development because it's a process. But today, it's no more an option, right? So I think we will see more indigenization as we go along. But having said that, if you want proper indigenization, you should be clear as to what you want. How are you going to fight wars? Who are your future enemies? Right? And you need to have a long-term plan for that. And that is why I'll take you back to the first question. The Chief of Defence Staff. He is the one who has to decide this entire threat perspective and how to tackle it. Today, if suppose we say China is a threat, the Air Force says, I want so many fighters. The Navy says, I want so many ships. The Army says, I want so many guns. But if you have a clear idea what China can do, and there's a coordination, you can optimize all three. Okay, so that is something which has to be done. And once you optimize, you can indigenize accordingly or buy some accordingly. Because indigenization won't come overnight, it will come over a period of time. Or you can swap. For example, if you don't have a fighter, can you do with a missile which you have? And reduce the number of fighters. You can swap this thing. So that is something which has to be done. Then there is a saying called the best is the enemy of the good. You have something good, you don't want to use it, you want the best. So as a result, when you have the good stuff with you, you say, no, I want something better, the best. And that best becomes the enemy of the good. And you don't accept whatever is available to you. As a result, you can't get the best and you don't have the good. And you're left high and dry. Okay. So these are things which people have to do. And lastly, our MOD needs reform. Okay, universally our Ministry of Defence needs reform. It is too bureaucratic, too many IAS people who don't know technology and who don't know how armed forces function. So as a result, capability doesn't get built, right? Because a chap who doesn't know will never take a decision. You need knowledge to take a decision, right? So if you don't know how much traffic is there on a road, you'll not cross it, or you'll cross it prematurely. You'll do one of the two things you'll do wrong. So that is our problem. But I suppose after this event, after this standoff with China, things are going to change. Why is it going to change? You have to understand this. Suddenly, people have realized that you can beat China, whether it's through apps or Ladakh or wherever. Okay, for example, in that Galwan, though it is publicized that 20 people of ours got killed, there were more people died on the other side. And suddenly everyone says, oh, we can beat China. Okay, so now we have to really walk the talk. Our economy is down. You still have to raise as a power. And despite all this, we are one of the few economies which is going to grow. So you put all this together, we have no choice but to indigenize and grow forward. And I'm sure with people like you, all of you young people, which is our hope for the future, India will become a great power. I don't have doubts about it. Yeah.
Okay. So, sir, for our final question, we'd like to conclude on a lighter note. Okay. So, is there any story or maybe an incident from your long career that you'd like to share with the youth who will be watching this interview?
Well, I did share one story about the Pinaka weapon system. Right?
Right.
Okay. But more importantly, I'd like to share a story about the, that Kardungla, which I told you.
Right.
Okay. Now, about 15 years back, I was posted in Leh. Okay. And this entire route from Kardungla was under my charge. Right. And that was the time when people said, look, can we, make Kardungla a popular place for people to go and have a look and all. So I didn't know why should a chap go all the way up to 18,000 feet, low for and come back. He's got nothing to do. So we didn't have many things and all that. So I got hold of a couple of my youngsters and said, what do we do? He said, sir, why don't we have a cafe out there? So I said, yeah, it's very good because at 18,000 feet it's very cold. The person who drives all the way up there and he gets out suddenly is hit by a breeze, he'll want a hot cup of coffee or tea, right? And some snacks. So we made a small room, put a heater in it, and we started. And then if a chap comes all the way here, let him take a souvenir back, you know. And then, so yeah, fine. So that's how we started this, all these, a cafe out there and souvenirs out there. Initially, not many people bought it. Can you imagine for the first 1 month when we had all these things on display, we didn't even sell 1,000 rupees worth. But a lot of tea was drunk. Right? But now a lot of people go there, they buy mugs, they buy shawls, they buy t-shirts, they buy caps and say, okay, I've been to Kardungla. They take photographs, and ready-made photographs are made available. There's a place where you can this thing. So a lot of things have changed. And I'm very happy that I started something very small, and today it's quite popular there. Right? So, I mean, I could give you more stories, but I think this is great.
Alright. Alright, sir. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to both of us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Hope you're well.
Welcome, and my last message to you is all the best to both of you and all your friends.
Thank you.
And thanks for giving me this opportunity to reach out and talk to all of you. Okay. All I can say is that, you people are growing up in a knowledge society where knowledge is going to be power.
Right.
So acquire knowledge as you go along. Okay. Don't bother about money. Right. The second thing is serve your country. Serving your country doesn't mean joining the armed forces alone. Serve your country wherever you are, however you are, whenever you are, in whichever profession you are. Even if you go abroad and serve, it doesn't matter. Get knowledge and come back from there. And finally, ensure that knowledge comes to India. And the next point I'd like to put across to all of you is, there is always opportunity in adversity. Our nation is going through a tough time with China. But equally, people are seeing opportunity in this adversity. So every adversity has an opportunity, and equally, every opportunity there is an adversity lurking somewhere. So take care of that. Both go hand in hand. And last but not the least, be proud Indians. Okay? Indians are the best, and we should be proud of ourselves. Thanks a lot.